And that's when I turned to him and I was like, I think we're going to keep chasing everything else. What if we chase something fun? And I bought a whiteboard from Home Depot and I had him hang it in our bedroom. And I was like, could you just put it right next to our bed? And I laughed. He was like, people don't have whiteboards in their bedroom. And I was like, but we do. I want to dream about all the fun things like we could do, want to do, have always just imagined to do. So I want to start making a list and just like checking it off.
Welcome to Business Origin Stories. I'm Amy Schutte, your guide to crafting a magnetic message for a profitable business. This is the podcast for you if you're ready to claim the transformative power of your own origin story and use it to create a brand that finally stands out. We're here to level up, but more importantly, I'm here to help you elevate your influence, your community, and your impact on the world. Go ahead, hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening. And remember, the stories you tell yourself are your greatest currency. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Business Origin Stories. Today is all about joy. I'm talking to Lisa Even. She's a speaker, a coach, an author, and a joy connoisseur. The name of her book is Joy is My Job, and she has a really beautiful new podcast called Have Good Ripple Effect. Lisa embodies joy herself, and she's made a career out of helping people find their joy. This podcast interview is a beautiful heart-centered focus on what joy truly is. And Lisa speaks to large organizations. She has an organizational management background. And so when she comes into teams or works with people as a success coach, she goes deep on what it means to bring joy into your life so that you can be more productive, so your life can be happier. Anyway, she was joy to talk to, and I think you're going to really enjoy this interview with Lisa Even. All right, Lisa Even, I'm so glad to see you today. Can you tell everyone where you are right now?
Yeah. Well, if it was 2 days ago, I would have said Las Vegas, Nevada.
Oh, cool.
But since it's today, I can say Des Moines, Iowa.
Is that where you're from? Is that where you live?
I live in Iowa. Yep, that's where
Okay.
I live. I grew up here, lived in Wisconsin for a bunch of years, and then moved back.
I love that. My stepdad is from Iowa, and I have not been there. My husband's from Nebraska, but I very much like Midwestern people.
Right?
Yeah, everyone's very salt of the earth. You consider yourself Midwestern, right?
Oh, yeah. Yes,
oh, yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. We were just talking last night about fireflies. Do you guys have them? Because in Idaho, we don't have fireflies.
Oh, yeah,
And
we have them. It's like a rite of passage when you're, 7, 8, 9 years old that you're catching them.
And this is such a weird thing to talk about. Last night, I was like, I've actually never seen a firefly in person, and I feel like I'm really missing out on something really special in life. So
you are. That will definitely have to go on your joy list for sure.
Speaking of joy list, what a beautiful segue. Lisa, tell me all about you. Tell everyone what you do, why you are here. You have such a beautiful brand, and I have been so excited to interview you. So tell everyone about your joy.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I would say I'm an operational healthcare leader by background. So
Okay.
started my career leading people. And I always just really loved kind of those tricky employees that are like, I'm not doing it. And I was always like, why aren't we doing it? Right. I just want to try on your glasses and see what you see for a minute, just to really know like the why behind who you are and why you are and how you are. And then I had an opportunity to move back to Iowa, and I had a friend say, you should do keynote speaking. Like, you have a lot of energy. And literally that's the thing that everyone says when they meet me. They're like, did you know? And I'm like, yes, I drink a lot of coffee. And yes, I do have a lot of energy. So that's my day job, is a lot of keynote speaking around two things: having good ripple effect. So I would say, you want to make impact, right? You want to leave the world better than you found it. But oftentimes when we do too much of that, we forget to have joy. And my husband and I, a few years back, we were really burnt out. And I said, just to kind of condense the story a little bit, but I basically said, what if we keep our day jobs, but we also make joy our job? Like, we put it on our list, like without us making it happen, it won't. And so, yeah, those are the two things. That's
beautiful. Oh, I love it. We're going to talk about your books. You have a book all about joy and have a good ripple effect. Those are basically your two mantras, values, taglines. Tell me, I want to hear a little bit about the burnout. What led to that? And then what made you shift to, because there's a lot of values you could choose. So what
Yeah.
made you decide joy is the way? I would love to hear that story.
It's funny, like I often will do a values exercise with like teams and even at keynote speeches, sometimes I'll put like a big list up on the screen and I'm like, look at these items. And for me, achieving and meaningful work has always popped to the top. And I think that's part of the reason why like I picked my husband, right? I'm like, what a nice man. Like you work hard. Like I like that. And so it was always kind of at the top of our list. And then, 7, 8 years into the marriage, it was like, we're chasing, work responsibilities and the dishes and the laundry and our kids and all of the meetings that we have on our calendar. Even our furnace filter, like when to change it, was on our calendar. And I'm like, we're constantly just waiting for the next thing. Oh, once our kids sleep through the night, then it's going to be so much better and we're going to have so much more joy. And it's like kind of this false sense of, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And then I finally we were so exhausted one night, almost like zombies. And that's when I turned to him and I was like, I think we're going to keep chasing everything else. What if we chase something fun? Like, what if we say like, no, gosh darn it, it's our job. And I bought a whiteboard from Home Depot and I had him hang it in our bedroom. And I was like, could you just put it right next to our bed? And I laughed. He was like, people don't have whiteboards in their bedroom. And I was like, but we do. I want to dream about all the fun things like we could do, want to do, have always just imagined to do. And sometimes the only time we're together is before bed. So I want to start making a list and just like checking it off. And that's really where it started. That was 7 or 8 years ago. And now we've got kind of more of a systematic process in place. But it was a really fun, I think, moment to kind of say, maybe we can happen to the world, not the other way around.
Ugh, I love that. Okay.
Yeah.
I like the whiteboard idea in there because, everyone's creating vision boards or you write things down every day. At least I do in like a journal, part of my morning routine. But I love that you were doing this with your husband and it's so visible that you're like, forget the interior decor. Let's make joy the decor and make this cool. Did you, now looking back 7 years, you've had time to actually integrate joy into your life. It's become your career. It's become your life. So that's pretty cool. When you look back at those first things that you put on your list, have you checked off a bunch of them or were they big kind of random or not random, but like more vague values like joy, or were they very specific? Like, we're going to take this trip. We're going to do this. Talk to me a little bit about that list.
Mostly specific. I would say specific. And at that time, I would say if you put a piece of paper in front of yourself and say, what brings you joy or what could you do? Your first like thing is to be like, let's go out to dinner. Let's go on a walk. And so they were almost these like very simple, sweet things that we were like, oh, we can do that. And it's, yes, I give you permission. Yes, let's go. So they were really like small. And then I think we also had some on there that were like the giant, enormous travel the world, right? We had like very tactical and then very dreamy. And I would say we've started like over the years to be better at having like small, medium, and large.
Okay.
Like, things that we could do next week, things that we can do maybe in a couple of months to a year. And then some things on there, who knows, like we might travel the world someday. But we're just going to keep leaving it on there because I think a lot of our like smaller joy things are like leading to those bigger things, even though it's not quite clear how we would get there or pay for it, right?
Sure, but you're speaking it out into existence, which is always just amazing. And I like the idea of the little things. What can we do now to bring us joy? And then the big things. Also, the sweet things. I had a coach and he always used this analogy and I still love it to this day, but he's, we're asking so little out of life. You have a buffet in front of you and you go up to it and you grab, a couple pieces of lettuce and an olive, but there's lobster and there's all this stuff in front of you, but you don't even think that you should be grabbing those things or asking for those things. And so I love that you were able to say, okay, dinner's great. And also what else that's bigger could bring us joy? That's a cool story.
It is. And I think a lot of it too was half of it was permission.
Yeah.
It was like, gosh, that achiever in both of us was like, well, if we're not achieving, then we're not like, how are we measuring our lives? And so, we often think about it like a bank account, like you got to put money in to get money out. And so we're thinking about our joy of, okay, we need some joy to either look back on or look forward to, because today might be a little messy. Like we might come home and be like, oh, that was a day. And we've really found that kind of adding that in as a metric of our family has made the achiever in us be like, yes, you can exist. And it's given us the permission to kind of be like, well, if we don't do it, who will? And I think that's an odd space to be for a little bit because I remember being like, is this okay? It's okay, right? Like the world is not going to crash if I'm not over here, like making sure that last dish in the sink is clean or, spending hours and hours on email at night instead of the joyful things. It was odd. And I always say to people, hang with it because it gets easier the more you do it. And then you see the return on investment and you're like, geez, I'm a nicer person. I'm so nice now.
What you're fundamentally talking about is an identity shift, right? You're
Yes.
saying, I can stop worrying and holding up the world and I can put all my focus on this and it's going to be okay. The money will still be there. The world will still be there. Life will still be there. And it will actually probably be a lot better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ooh,
and if you have to trick your brain into being two things at once, I say, feel free. Like you can be stressed and a little bit of joy, like there can be like two things happening. And I often talk about, I had a cousin pass away unexpectedly, and it took a lot of years for me to be able to be like, in that moment of like, gosh, I miss her so much. But also, wasn't Erin just a blast? Like I can speak from both the sides of like, that was really hard and not great. But yet, like when I think of her, like I'll tell my kids about her and I'm like, you have never met a human like this. And so I think that there's some acknowledgement of sometimes there might be a little bit of both, and that's going to feel different, but it's okay. No one really talks about that. We want there to be like a very specific 1 + 1 = 2. And I'm like, actually, it's going to be a 1.5 for a while, and then it might be a 1, and then it might be a 3.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so sorry to hear about your cousin. But I think that's a beautiful way to look at life because that's everything, right? There's duality with everything. And so how are you how old are your kids?
Yeah, the kids, it's great. So they're 9, almost 10. She'll be 10 this week.
Okay.
And then 12. And they do it too.
Okay. So tell me about this family practice. I want to talk about how you bring this into corporations and you're speaking in your book, but I love talking about, I'm a mom too. I love the family side of it. I think it's the most important work we can do as parents. So how are you teaching your kids to do this, or how have you made this part of your family ritual, habit? Talk to me about that.
We moved from a whiteboard in our bedroom. And then as our kids got a little bit bigger, we would just ask them like, what would be really fun? What do you want to do? And then as they got bigger, now, of course, they can both write. And so oftentimes we'll put a sheet in front of them and we'll say, what do you want to add to your joy list? And, my daughters, I want to play at McDonald's Play Place, and I want to make donut balls, and I want to go to the arcade. And it's really fun to see them start to be like, well, what else should I do? Now, I would say like my son and my daughter, I would say my daughter has a ton of things. As my son gets older, I'm like, what else? And so that teenage years, we're still like kind of navigating the piece of it. But I'll never forget, we were down in St. Louis. It was part of our joy list. We were going to do a holiday down in St. Louis. So it was Thanksgiving. And we checked into our Airbnb, which was this really cool warehouse, like a really neat, like 6-story warehouse right next to a couple of the things that we were going to visit. And it was our second or first night there. I can't remember exactly, but there was a pipe that burst in the hall. And so we woke up to 2 inches of water, like in our apartment everywhere. Like my husband was like, hey, we got to pack our stuff up, get it off the floor. There's water everywhere. And my husband that morning, I think it was Thursday, or sorry, not Thursday, Friday, because it wasn't the actual holiday. But anyways, he had a couple of meetings that he needed to take in this space. Like he was going to take them early in the morning, and then, our kids were going to wake up, and then we're going to have a great day. And I laugh because I'm like, you have to take your meetings. Are you going to stay in this wet apartment? And he's, yeah, I mean, I think so. Right. Like, where else would I go? I'm like, okay, well, I'll take the kids and we'll like go find something to do. So we went and grabbed coffee, and there was a really cool, I think it's called Union Station in St. Louis. And they have all sorts of things to look at. So I just thought, let's go have our coffee. We'll wait in the hotel lobby. P.S. We might need a hotel lobby shortly here because we're probably not living back at that space. And I remember sitting there frantically being like, gosh, I wish his meetings would get done. Like, I need you to finish. And I turn and I hear my son saying to my daughter, well, Elena, it's our job to make joy. And I was like, yes, thank you. Like in that moment, I'm like, okay, even if we don't get it right 70% of the time, like that is a skill that I hope that they like put in their pocket. And that was probably the first moment where I saw them like kind of taking a stand to be like, this was out of our control, but yet like we're going to happen to it. So that was a really long story, but I it just goes to show like kiddos, they're actually pretty good at it.
I mean, kids are the ultimate joy, right? They don't
Yes.
need to be taught. Well, I think we enjoy ourselves through the years. And so, but it's nice that you've made that part of their conversation and their
Yeah.
vocabulary where it's really an anchor for them moving forward. That's a great
Yes.
story.
Thank
Had
you.
an Airbnb nightmare.
Oh, right.
Alcohol. That's cool. So how have you taken this concept? Because now you've made a career out of it and this is your life's work. How did you take it from your bedroom, your kids out to the world? What did that look like? And how are you? Yeah, you've got a book. Talk to me about your book. Give me all the juicy details.
Okay.
Tell me all the joy.
Well, and I laugh because if I back up 7 or 8 years ago, I was leading teams in healthcare and I was in the neurosciences space. And so we would have patients that would come into our office and pretty much everyone, I shouldn't say it like that. Many of them, well, many of those patients, we were saying things like, hi, you have cancer in your brain. Hi, you have a tumor. We don't know if it's cancerous. Hi, you've got a neurological condition that you're probably not getting rid of, like Parkinson's. So we were pretty much saying like tough stuff all day long. And I remember not only, I think part of my exhaustion too, right, was just the environment in which I was living in day to day was this just really hard place. And so that's where the tagline of have good ripple effect came from, of we have to take care of one another, because if we don't, we're not going to be there to, create good ripples for our patients and for the families that we serve. And then at night, right, like I'm saying, and we need more joy, like in our lives. And then I laugh because one day it kind of clicked and I was like, I think we need more joy at our jobs. And so we started to kind of replicate joy on our team. Essentially, we had a social committee and they were really focused on how can we create a little bit more engagement and joy within the team. Mm-hmm. And as my job as the leader, I always say you're kind of the cruise director, right? Like you're helping us figure, okay, we're headed this way. Here are the amenities of our team, those sorts of things. And so we made the shift from having good ripple effect and joy at work as well. And so I do a lot of training and speaking on the impact piece of how's your culture? How's your resilience? How are you communicating? But then on the other hand, it's also, and are you having fun doing it? I really, really want you to have fun doing it. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about, I think, how the work component came to be. And then the book is really kind of that introduction into, well, what if you're sitting here listening thinking, well, I want more joy. Like, how do I get that? And I really kind of got tired of people saying, could you write that down? Could you email me what you guys do as a family? And I was like, sure. And then I was like, I should maybe put it out into the world and actually tell people how to do it. So that's kind of how the book came to be, working on the next iterations of like, how do you do that officially with your teams? How do you do that with kids? So that'll be kind of the next couple of years to put it out there. But I wouldn't say that I'm an author per se. I've always wanted to grow up and write a book and have that. It was more just like enough people were like, hey, can you tell me? And I was like, yeah, here you go.
That's great. I think we all come to writing in different ways, but I think you should call yourself an author because you wrote a book.
Oh, right.
Okay, but do tell me some tactical things to do this, because I've worked in a hospital before and joy is usually not the default in most places. And then bringing joy into a team can feel, I don't know. I'm curious how your team react to that, or when you work with other bigger teams where the culture has just been heavy and hard.
Yeah.
And then you're saying joy. People like, woo, that's too frivolous. Oh my gosh, we've got stuff to do. Tell me how you are actually integrating joy into team culture, helping other people do that, because I do think that is such a needed thing. And I'm curious how you're structuring that.
Yeah, there's a couple things. I'm going to give you like some tidbits that like in my sessions, they'd be a little bit different ordered. But the first order of business I always say is hey, I want you to raise your hand if you're stressed. And 90% of the room, yes. And I'm like,
Yeah.
how many of you care about the things that you're doing at work? Right? Like, how many of you want to make a difference? And they're like, yeah. And I say, and the interesting thing about that is you're probably creating an obscene amount of cortisol in your body. Like that stress hormone is really high. And so part of our jobs when we're in an environment that has high stakes, right, is to really make sure that your cortisol levels are in a decent spot. And so when I talk about joy, we're going to talk about it from not necessarily the angle of everything is awesome, but more like the angle that, okay, we really want to make sure that we're in a good spot. And that really is going to look different for everyone. I often give the example of if I gave you $10,000 to go on a cruise, where would you go? And, I ask a room of, 200 people. There are going to be some people that are like, oh my gosh, I love cruises. This is where I'm going. And then there's going to be a portion of the room that says, I don't want to go on a cruise. Don't put me on a boat. And I'm like, yep, joy is like that. It's very unique to you. And so your joy is going to be something that only you can decide what that looks like and how you want that to play out. And so we're going to talk about how do you, decide how and what that looks like. And then what we talk about some strategies. I have some fun things like crappy to happy. Like we do a lot of crappy, unglamorous things in our day-to-day work. What are you doing either before, during, or after to make that a little bit more happy? What does that look like for you? So it's almost this idea of shifting your mind. And then we say, okay, if we're shifting our mind to say, yeah, I want it, and it's going to be unique to you. Okay, well, where does that go? And I actually have some joy challenges and some different things that teams can talk through of what does that look like? And then I also have some things for leaders to think about. I had this cranky guy named Paul on one of my teams, and Paul did not want joy. And finally, I had to kind of be like, yo, Paul, I know that this is not for you, but it is for others. And so just know that not everything is for everyone. And I think that that's an important, so you're telling me I can opt out? And I'm like, yes, sir, I am. Like the potluck that we're doing with the team, if that does not bring you joy, don't go on the cruise.
Yeah.
And we're going to be happy for you when you do it. And I think there are just some like parameters that you just have to kind of set and be able to kind of swing between. And so that's what we do is talk a lot about how are you showing up? What are you thinking? And then how are you executing on it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that because so many people, I'm assuming, so tell me if this is wrong, that people like Paul are probably struggling with what does joy even look like for you? I think there's so many of us who have gotten so numb to so many things in the world, and to have a sparkler like you come in and be like, let's bring joy. They're like,
yeah, right?
What does that even mean? Like, I've got deadlines, lady. I've got things to worry about. So, but I like that you're saying it's really custom and specific to each person, and it's everyone's journey to go on to find their joy.
And you're more productive when you actually are enjoying life. You're not actually working at high capacity and being as productive as you'd like when you're stressed. And so, oftentimes we'll talk about what are you seeing in the culture of your team? Because a lot of those like attitudes and traditions, habits, the ways of being, those are really great indicators of A, culture and what we need to shift, and B, joy. If I turn around and oh my gosh, we're so busy, I'm like, oh, that's a sign. There is an opportunity to maybe do some shifting in terms of what do we want our culture to look like? How do we get there? And are we having a little bit of fun doing it?
I like that. What brings you immense joy? What are the things that when you're getting into that busy mode and it's like a red beige flag, what do you have some go-to things for this is my joy right here? I'm going to always go back to this thing. Or is it different in each season? What does it look like?
That's a great question. I don't know that I've ever been asked that. My first gut was there's a couple things that I now keep on my joy calendar, like no matter what, like they don't go away. And the first one I would say is my husband and I don't have time for date night because our kids are in that, like we drive them to sports and all the things. And so oftentimes our date night is on Wednesday afternoons from 3:10 to 4:00 p.m. And it's, literally our kids get home from school. We're like, do you want technology and a snack? They say yes. And then we go on date night. and we have 50 or so minutes to be just us. And a lot of times we have a coffee shop list printed off. We're literally like driving to the coffee shop, ordering the coffee, drinking the coffee, driving home. And then we're like, hello, children, we're here. And that's one thing that we're always trying to make sure we have like our quote unquote date hour or date night. Because I have found that for me, that's a really hard thing. If I'm not in sync with like in my home life, my work life doesn't happen. And so that for me has been something that I really can't give up. And sometimes it's 10 minutes, right? Like I'm like, hey, do you want to go on a date? And we walk to the mailbox and then we walk home. And he's, yes, I would love to. I'm like, okay, great, let's go. And I think that's the same at work. It's a lot of, do you take 10 minutes and just kind of say, hey, this is time for that.
Yeah.
That's my advice probably.
Yeah. I like that you can make it as simple as let's go for a walk. Let's take 10 minutes. Like joy doesn't have to be this elaborate. Let's go to the arcade. Let's spend all our money and go to Hawaii. But it can be as simple as just get out in nature and sit in the sun for a second and ground and get some joy.
I have a good friend. He said, well, after one of the sessions, he goes, I now have joy for 5 minutes every morning. And I was like, what? And he goes, yeah, I literally make my pot of coffee and I stand by the coffee like the coffee pot for 5 minutes after I pour my cup and I savor it. And he goes, I know that it's like mission accomplished that I've had 5 minutes to just savor something in the world. Like the rest of the day might go to heck in a handbasket, but I have taken 5 minutes and like, yeah. So I've started doing it too.
Okay, I love that. I don't know if you do this. I always pick a word of the year that I try to kind of make. I love when Joy's people's word, but one of my friend Tracy, her word is savor. And she's had that for the past 2 years, I think. And I've always loved that word. And I like that you're saying it can fit with this coffee because even just slowing down and being really present for just a minute can give us that jolt of whatever we need. So that's great. Okay, that's a great takeaway tip for everyone listening. Just savor your coffee in the morning.
I know, even because I think, like you said, we think that it has to be grand and super exciting. And I'm like, no, I'm talking about like technical, tactical things that make your life day to day better. When my husband and I were sitting there looking at each other like we're exhausted, we weren't necessarily looking for an adventure. We were looking for just almost a little bit of peace and a little bit of, no, we have some control here. And if you give yourself those 5 minutes, you're just like, I know at least the control person in me is, see, I did it.
Yeah. That's cool. What are 3 ways that I like starting with like small steps and owning those first things, but what are 3 ways that people could, especially if they have joy as a default setting already, but what are ways to kind of up the joy in life as they're doing business, as they're looking at their team, or if they're a team leader, what are ways that they can just really start, obviously bring you in to speak, but next steps, like what could they just do to start bringing a little bit of joy into a situation?
Yeah, I would say the first order of business is often the joy list. If you have a list at the ready, I don't know if you've ever been there, but you look at your spouse and you're like, hey, where do you want to go to eat? I don't care. Where do you want to go? Oh, I don't care. Where do you want to go? And we waste kind of a lot of time trying to think up the ideas. And that's the same for a team. Oh, what should we do? I don't know. And so I always say like first order of business is to get a list. Now, there might be 3 things on your list, but if you get any, that's a list, right?
Yeah.
So I always say start there. And I always say look backwards because maybe there are things that you used to do. Like oftentimes I'll give that cruise example and I'll say, where are you going? And they're like, Alaska, Jamaica, Mediterranean. And we get like this smattering of places. And then I'll say, well, what if this trip was actually 15 years ago? And some of the people in the room were like, I was so much more fun. And I'm like, me too. Because my kids were like, I didn't have them and I didn't have any responsibilities. And the other part of the room's like, I had one gentleman raise his hand and say, well, I would have been 12. And I'm like, oh, your trip would have looked different. He's, yeah. And so I often say, look back at the things that you used to do, whether it's, oh man, I used to love to go ice skating. And maybe you're like, but I can't anymore. And you're like, but I can watch it on TV, right? There's all sorts of ways to kind of like bring back all the good times. And then that's the first order of business. And I always say, make it visible. If you can put it on your fridge or, maybe a whiteboard in your bedroom would be great.
Sure,
Just
I like
having that at the ready is a first step because you'll figure out quickly if you're ready for joy. If you're like, I didn't get anything on my list. right? That's a sign to say, oh, I've got some maybe convincing to do in my mind of, no, you could have joy. So that's step number one. Step number two is actually put it on the calendar. If you say it, if you're not a calendar person, like you don't have to do this part. This is just like an idea, is really get it on the calendar so that it happens. Because oftentimes, I'll say to, I had one woman kind of raise her hand in a session and she goes, well, I have enough joy. Thanks. And it was my favorite.
I don't need any joy.
Yeah, it was my favorite moment because I went over and I wanted to be like, can I try on your glasses? Let me just see what you see for a minute. Yeah. But instead of officially saying that, I was like, tell me more. And she goes, well, we do a good job. We've got enough. And I said, yes, 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 yes. Because if you're already having it, check, right? And if you're being a little bit of a turkey, which I don't know if you are, right? Like you might actually need to schedule it. Because sometimes, people will be like, oh, we've got a vacation planned in September. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, it's June. Mm-hmm. You're going to wait till September to have some joy? I don't say that, but that's what I'm thinking. And so, part of getting it on the calendar is to make sure it happens. My husband and I sit down once a month with our calendar and we literally sit there with a glass of wine and we're like, do we have enough joy? Should we add some? Because essentially we're like the cruise directors, right? Like we're going to look at our lives and say, do we have enough? And if we don't, we're going to add some. And so it brings like that level of intentionality to it. And then the third one, I would say, probably my advice is it's going to be messy, but do it anyway. We took our kids to a movie and they were being so naughty. They were throwing popcorn and rolling around on the floor. We get out in the parking lot. My husband, I'm like, this was supposed to be joyful. It was on the calendar, right? And we were like thinking to ourselves, we can't count this as joy. And it was so funny because literally like our kids are like running around in the grass and my husband's like, mission accomplished. Yeah, the joy was there. It just looked different. So those are like my three probably biggest pieces of advice is create a list, put it on the calendar, and then ready for it to look a little different than what you imagined.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, I have so many more questions for you because I think I'm laughing at the lady saying, or actually at you going, do we have enough joy? What is enough joy? Is there a limit on joy? Did you get there with your husband? We're like, we've maxed out on joy. Like
right? We haven't yet.
It does not exist.
Yeah. We haven't yet.
What does this look like? Okay. When you're looking at the calendar, you have daily joy, you have weekly joy, you've got long-term joy. How do you, because again, when I think about my kids are a little younger than yours, but my kids' joy often looks different than my joy, your point of the movie, right? Like my 4-year-old could sit and play cars with me all day. I have found that I don't love sitting there and playing cars for more than like 10 minutes. Otherwise, I'm like, I'm out. But, how do you decide as a family and then you personally what those things look like? You and your husband are deciding, and then are your kids having all this input? Give me this quick behind the scenes. Yeah. What is the limit for joy? I want this on my calendar.
Joy. So part of our strategy, which I laugh is not scientific, is truly just to look to say, are there going to be any really hard parts in the month? And do we have any joy like around it? Like we either need it, I always think like before, during, or after, because I think those are things that, maybe we have a big, huge project due. And I'm like, are we celebrating that? Right? Or we have a lot going on with our family. Are we celebrating that? And so that for us just feels easy to say, what's going to be hard? What do we need around it? And then we also look at, are there any long stretches of time that are going to go by? Meaning like we look a couple weeks out and we're like, oh, we don't see anything like fun there. That's oftentimes like when we're like, hey, pull out that kids list. Do we have, they mentioned they wanted to do X. Maybe we'll put it here. So it almost becomes kind of this like mishmash of looking for crevices of like, where could we put a little? Because there's not a lot of time with like sports and family. And then the other thing, I often will have people like look at their calendar and I'll say, you, me, and we. So is there anything that's on there for you? Meaning like for me, my joy has kind of lately become workout class. And I'm like, okay, good. Check. Yep. I've got something for me. And then when I think about my spouse, sometimes like, and kind of like even like your kiddo's joy, you're like, I do not want to play cars. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, we've got a little bit of that, but that's for them. I would say being in someone else's joy, whether it's sitting with my husband watching a football game and him telling me every stat that I don't care about, right? Like my job in that moment is to be in his joy. So when he's, when they do the thing and then they do the thing and then they do the thing, I am like, oh yeah, because it's my opportunity to be in their joy and it doesn't necessarily have to count as mine.
Yeah.
And then we always just make sure there's like a fun we moment, meaning like our family unit. Is there something that maybe we're all going to do together? My husband, actually, this is really cute. I don't know if you'll be able to see it on the screen, but yesterday I came out into the living room and my daughter had done this and their game boxes. And then I know you can't read it, but there's a little piece of paper that says games of the week.
Oh.
And so it's kind of fun where it's like, oh, there's our we. Now we can all kind of be together in that.
Yeah.
And then I always just say, even if you get one thing on your calendar the first month, it's more money in the bank than you had last month.
Yeah.
So don't stress on, do we have a certain amount to begin with? It's really more about just making sure like we're building the muscle of actually having some.
Mm-hmm. I like the togetherness of say that again.
It's like you,
me, and we. I like that because that goes back to your have a good ripple effect piece as well, where it's not all of a sudden it's all about my joy, right? You're really saying like the ripple effect of being in your joy is beautiful for me too. And I can hold that and experience that, because I know I made the joke about the cars, because I do enjoy sitting there watching, right? Watching someone in their joy gives you a lot of joy. So I think that's a cool piece. What is something, I know you said it was kind of hard for you as an achiever at the very beginning to be like, is this okay? Do you experience that when you're giving your keynotes or when you're working with teams, for teams to be like, this does not feel safe in my body to do this? Are you addressing some of that somatic piece of it too? Because, right, that's like a lot of nervous system regulation for people to be like, I can be happy. I'm just really curious if that comes up. They've tied so many studies to, vacations and how that, makes you live longer, and being in joy is so good for you, especially if you're working in healthcare, right?
Yes.
We see the results of illness. And so tell me how you tie this back to something that maybe people can practice within their body, and then how you tie it to business or numbers that some of these other people you have to convince.
Yes, like the
to
other
point to some of the financials.
Yeah, like the
go there to
feeling
those
and the
places.
thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Oftentimes we start the conversation around with, if today was the last day of your career and it was like 4:30 p.m. and it was quitting time. If this was like the very last moment, you're packing up your box, maybe you work out of a truck or a car, maybe you travel a lot and you like emptied out your computer from your briefcase. If today was the very last day of your career and you were just getting ready to open the door for the very last time, and out of the corner of your ear, you hear someone say, they were really blank. They were really blank. What is it that you hope you hear? And I really start to give people a little bit of permission. And usually it's quiet. Like I don't make them share this part with anyone, but it's just really, if we zoom ahead and we get to the end, like, what do you want to see at the end? And then if we zoom back to today, how are we in our 2-minute moments making impact, but also making sure that we're having joy so that we're not turning into kind of like a really like cranky, burnt out employee. And if you're kind of aware in both spaces of, okay, I am doing good things and I am having a little bit of fun. Okay, well, how do you then show up in a way that brings that? So we talk a lot about like a circle of control of what can you actually control versus what you can't. And then we talk a little bit about those values of, sometimes values fight, right? Like that achiever in me, 10 years ago would have duped on it with joy to be like, do you know how important it is for me to get this project done and to make Q2 metrics? And now I say to myself, yes, and we should probably carve out 10 or 5 or 15 minutes for a little bit of fun, because you're going to be a better, more productive human. So it's actually kind of a combination of kind of like, what are we after?
Mm-hmm.
And then like, how are we getting there? And so we talk a lot about like identity and values. And then I always say, when it comes to joy, start small, when the risks are really low. Like 5 minutes of savoring your coffee, right? Like you're in your pantry and you shut the doors and no one can see it. Right? Have a moment where you can actually practice that. Or maybe it's with like your spouse or your family, before you go out and do it in a big way.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's how you build safety and that's how you build a habit. You don't walk in the gym and lift like a 200-pound weight and just be like, see, I did it. Like you walk in and you start with your little 2-pound weights and and then you work your way up. And so that's really how I would encourage someone to kind of start. And so that it doesn't feel like I can't do this. I'm not making it happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's the best advice. I love that. So thank you for walking us through that. Cause I do think there's probably, I can see the achiever in me a long time ago, wanting joy and the fun and that like bubbly spirit. And also, when you're in a stress mode and survival mode at work and you're just like running and you're like, I just don't have time for this. And then people crouch, you're just running around and then you've got the joy fairy over here, right? Lisa being like joy. So I love that. I think you're right. Those little small steps towards anything is such a beautiful way to do.
And I think the way that I would say, like, when a lot of people think of joy as like this big sparkly thing, I'm actually more like joy, like joy, like joy, like feeling alive and feeling like the person that you used to be, like a little bit of like that. And so, yeah, it's funny because it feels like a really sweet, soft topic. And then I actually say like, how many of you are stressed? And then it's, oh, we're getting real. And I'm like, actually, it's a really real topic, more so than a lot of other things at work. I've had people kind of start tearing up and I say, you might feel like a little bit of, oh, and so it's a tough topic, but it's also really fun when you give yourself a little bit of that permission. I got a card in the mail. It's like hanging over here from a woman who said, we're not getting divorced. We're not getting divorced. We started to do some joy dates and they had done 9 of them. And she's, we're not getting a divorce. And I'm like, that's joy. That's joy. And so, yeah, there's an interesting connotation that comes with it. But I think I'm after the meatier, savory part of it versus the slap a Band-Aid on it and pretend we're having a good time.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's give that some space. That's so good. Do you talk about that in your book? Because I do think there's there's happiness and then there's joy and there's all these definitions that you could go down. But I love that you're going right here to this like deep, heart-centered.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep using the word savor. It's so beautiful. Moment of joy in your life just to keep you, remind you you're alive. This is you're
alive. That's the part
precious life, right?
Yeah. I literally look at it and I think, going back to that cousin, like I remember, I think a little part of my joy journey probably came from that, right? This urgency of, I get another day, like Aaron doesn't. And so I feel like when people start to maybe look ahead and think, oh, if we zoom ahead, life is a little bit short. And I want you to feel more alive today than yesterday. And that might just be savoring a cup of coffee or, a few minutes to just breathe. Like I had people at work where we would talk about like crappy to happy. Okay, so we've got all these things that we got to get done, right? So that's the crappy. And then what's the happy? And sometimes it's, I'm going to walk around the building. And I'm like, yes, please. After you get done, please walk around the building. And I think I remember like one of them bursting through the door being like, oh, I feel more alive. And in my mind, I'm like, yeah, that's it. It's right there.
Yeah. Yeah. It has such a ripple effect on other people when you are in your joy. So
yeah,
it's huge. Do you still work at the hospital or are you full-time doing your keynotes, doing your work?
I'm full-time doing this. So I fill my days with keynotes and a lot of team retreats and workshops, really centered around kind of impact and joy. So it's kind of that culture piece meets like, it's almost, I always say it's like the me and meets the we, because I want to talk about like, how is your team functioning? But hi, how are you? Are we keeping an eye on that? And so a lot of the like topics and things are related to what's the ripple effect of you and what's the ripple effect of your team. And are you having fun?
I love that. Tell me, are you working with people over a period of time? Are you kind of coming in every quarter? Tell us how people can work with you. Cause I think,
yes.
Give me the pitch.
Yeah. So I do a lot of couple 1,000-person conferences. So that is truly like drop in and drop out. So oftentimes I will do kind of the motivational 1-hour keynote. And then other times I've got organizations who will work with me on like a series. So we'll have a series of topics spread throughout the year. And then occasionally I'll have an association or a team say, we just have this annual day. Could you come in for the annual day? So yeah, I really like to kind of a combination of all three, because I think I had my most recent keynote, there was probably, I don't know, 1,500 to 2,000 people in the room. And I got a message, months later saying, hey, my son was in the room. He's a high school senior. He wrote a graduation speech on the power of ripple effect, and it was selected. And so he gave a speech to then his, 800 like fellow graduates. And you never quite know what your ripple effect will be. And so I like a little bit of the kind of big stage, but also kind of some of that smaller stage as well.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah. That's so good. Okay. So everyone listen up. Lisa's available. Do you have a certain industry or niche that you like to work with? Specific? Do you stay within the healthcare piece, or are you all over the place? Who do you love to work with?
Yes, I love that question. And actually, when I started my business, it was right before COVID. So healthcare was busy. I laugh. I'm like, okay, healthcare is busy. So I've really been in a number of different industries, from construction to automotive to insurance. I was just out at ESPN and Disney not long ago. A lot of the topics translate, and then we customize based on the audience. So I want to make sure that the examples matter. I wouldn't necessarily give a construction example to folks that work behind a desk. Yeah. And so I spend quite a bit of time just making sure that I understand the examples that we'll use, but a lot of the concepts relate. If I say, dear construction workers, are you stressed? They're like, yes, I am. And then
yes,
you jump over into the insurance space there too. Yeah. And I think we're all looking for kind of that mindset shift meets technical meets stories and strategies to get there.
Yeah, that's great. Can I pivot just a little bit with a few more questions? Okay. So for people in those industries, call Lisa. She'll come in and do a cool keynote and work with your teams. For people who are listening and going, oh my gosh, I want to be on a stage. I want to pivot from my stressful career to moving into the speaking career. Do you have any advice for someone that's in that space? Because I have a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of women that listen that are like, they're probably like, oh my gosh, how do I do what you're doing? How did you tell me a little bit about that transition from leaving corporate to doing this full time and creating your own thought leadership?
Yes. I'll tell you a little bit about how I did it. And then I always say every human I meet I'm like, oh, you did it that way. So there are a million ways, in fact. But when we moved back to Iowa, I worked part-time and I started my business part-time. For about 8 months, I thought, okay, well, I know I need a little bit of income coming in, but I know I need some time to work on my business. And so I spent that period of time doing a couple of things. The first thing I did was make sure I had social media. I need to create an Instagram page. And I needed to look at my LinkedIn, which hadn't been updated in forever. And that was first order of business. And then the second order of business was I knew I had some things to say, but I didn't quite know how it would come out, right? So I emailed a few friends and said, hey, I would love to offer a free lunch and learn for your team. And I want to talk about, these three things. So whatever it was, if it's you, right, whatever you're good at, offer it to a small group for free. So I did a couple of those lunch and learns. And the first one, I was way over on time, right? I had more slides and I was like, oh no, that was 30 minutes. It's done. But it was free. So there was, and the person that's my friend, I was engaging enough, right? I started a good conversation for her team. And then I just asked if my friend would take a picture from the back of the room. Okay, could you snap a picture backs of heads? And then I put that on social media and said, today I had the pleasure of speaking with, insert that group. And, today we talked about this and this and this. And then I just slowly started to put out content based on what I was doing. And then after I had given a couple of those free presentations, I was like, oh, this is what I talk about. And then it was like, okay, well, now I feel confident enough that I have slides and I have words to say out loud. And then it kind of blossomed from there of saying, okay, well, where can I put this so that I can do more of that? And so I actually applied to speak at a couple of conferences because they often have breakout sessions that you don't get paid for, but it's a whole bunch of eyeballs in a room. Yeah. And from there, I got eyeballs to say, hey, could you come speak to my team? So it was kind of a little baby snowball or a little ripple effect.
Yeah.
But I was just consistent on social media.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was the winner. And it wasn't necessarily crazy, amazing social media. It was just like, yesterday I spoke at the blank, blank, blank. It was great. The end. At least
end,
people
yeah.
knew. Yeah. And then
Yeah.
I was always surprised that like a couple people below that would be like, could you come talk to our team? It's like, wow, okay.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's great. Those small actions are so great. And thank you for going back there, because I do think a lot of people see speakers on stages and they're like, we're going to do that one day, or we're going to write a book one day.
Yeah.
And it can be really overwhelming as well. And so it's so great to have really tangible, I just did this and then I did this. So thank you for going there, because we're used to seeing the, success story at the end. And it's so nice to hear those behind the scenes pieces. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be the best. That's the thing I always say. It just needs to be a little bit better than yesterday. And so when I'm like going into a presentation, if you look at my first social media posts or even my first website, I like laugh because I'm like, oh, look how far we came and how terrible that was. But I had to be awful before I could be awesome.
Yes.
And that's usually what I tell myself is, you're going to be kind of awful when you start. And you should be, like, unless you're like, that prodigy that steps up to the plate and is, I can hit a home run. Like you're gonna be. And so my goal was just to be a little bit better than yesterday. And the other thing I'll say is I tend to consider myself like a scientist, where I'm like, I just want to live in the lab. I want to try something and see if it works. All the inventors who invented cool things, like they didn't walk into the lab first time and be like, oh, I'm going to invent electricity. Okay.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the things that I do, whether it's like a story that I tell or, an exercise that I have teams work on or go through, it's like living in the lab. And the first time that I do it, I'm like, oh, I think I got to change this up. Like with the next group, I need to switch that a little bit. And so it's those fine tweaks that allow me to be like, well, it wasn't a complete failure. I just need to change this and that. It was just an experiment. Like I got to try another experiment because that one wasn't quite right.
I love that. Yeah. I think, that's the heart of entrepreneurship, right? Is just going out and like being visible and trying something, and it could be really bad. But I think that's where most people give up. They try once or twice and they're like, this is not working, or I put this out and no one's listening. And so I hope if you're listening and you hear Lisa's story, this gives you encouragement to just keep going, just keep trying, because that's how you get good. So I love the science lab story. That's a great connection.
Thank you. And the one other thing I'll say is when I was writing the book, I was waiting for someone to be like, your book is terrible, because I had prepared for that, right? I had prepared and I thought, okay, when the person comes up to me and says, your book is trash, what are you going to say? And in my mind, I have prepared myself to say this: I'm doing hard things. What are you doing? And just really encouraging them, like from a spot of, well, who knows, maybe. Right? Like I'm living in the lab. Are you? And I think that kind of cleared the way for a lot of, I don't have to be confident in anything other than the fact that when that happens, I have something to respond with that feels authentic and genuine. And it kind of just says, yeah, probably. Yeah. What are you doing?
Yeah. That's great. I love the arena quote, about being in the arena, and you're really the only person that matters. And so I like that you have that comeback. I'm glad no one said that to you, because I think your book is really amazing. We should all go get it. So where can people find your book? On Amazon, on your website? And you have a new podcast too, or newer podcast, right? So tell us all the ways that people can connect with you and find you, and where we can buy your book.
Yeah. So you can go to lisaeven.com and there's a shop link at the top, or you can grab it on Amazon. Both will lead you to the same spot. And then, my podcast is called Have Good Ripple Effect. No surprise. And so I talk a lot about, season 1 just came out about a month ago, a little over.
Very good. Congratulations.
Yeah, I'm living in the lab. You'll notice like the first couple episodes, like I'm like, hi, I'm Lisa Even. But by the 5th episode, it gets better. And so I invite you to live in the lab with me, number 1. And it's been just an amazing journey to be able to kind of share some of the, behind the scenes look of, we always see other people, especially on social media, being like polished and, in their like perfect spot. And I'm just kind of like, okay, if we want to have impact, what do we need to do? How do we get there? So a lot of stories and strategies and science, but a little bit of laughter. Oh yeah. We didn't start there. Yeah. We started way back here.
Mm-hmm. I think that fits with everything that you've said today in this interview that goes with your brand. It's just a little steps at a time, little action. Doesn't have to be this grand thing. Just keep going. And I think that is such a great way to live life. And thank you for sharing that with us. I think it's a great reminder.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, so good. Do you have one last piece of advice? You've given us so much in this interview, but is there one last thing or a book besides your book that you love, that you want to leave with people that you think would be really helpful to either teams or that entrepreneur that's hearing you and thinking, I want to live in the lab and I want to be brave and do this thing too?
Yeah. I would say probably the piece of advice that I give myself is like, you happen to the world, not the other way around. And what I mean by that is not necessarily in the big ways, but in the small ways. Like, you'd be shocked that, when you sit behind your desk and you think, oh, how am I ever going to get there? I always think, okay, I can happen to that. Well, what can I do? And I always use what are the next 3 things I can do? Who can I talk to? Who should I email? Who could I ask? And it's almost like action creates action. And so sometimes we feel like, man, the world is just like hard on me. And I'm like, oh, but what if you happened to it? What if you got out there and did something very teeny tiny that actually made a difference?
That was perfect. I mean, I really think actions are values in motion. And so I love that we can co-create our lives and do these things. And so having that paradigm shift when we're thinking of, I can happen to the world, I can do these small things is so good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. And everyone, go find Lisa. Where can we find you on Instagram, LinkedIn? Tell us where to hang out with you on social media.
LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram are the 3 places that you can find me. And you can also, I have my podcast links on YouTube as well. So you can find me there.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks for listening to Business Origin Stories. Love the podcast? Be sure to share it with a friend